Hello, everyone. For people that are logging on, we are so sorry about that little technical hiccup that we just had this morning. I sent out an email for everybody regarding having a link. So we should be up and running in just a few minutes. We're going to wait for letting a few people come on that have been emailing, and then we will start the webcast. So sorry for the delay, guys. We are just about to start. Okay, good morning, everyone. We want to thank you for joining us today for tapping into the TiR Toolkit. And again, so sorry for that little technical hiccup that we had this morning, but now we can start. Today's interactive training webcast focuses on the toolkit and its resources for green stormwater management. My name is Timothy Grant, and I'm the communications manager at Water Now Alliance. This webcast will provide you with an introduction to tap into resilience, which we often refer to as TiR. In addition to reviewing some of the resources included in the TiR Toolkit, for those of you that have not attended one of our webcasts before, we will also be focusing this month's webcast on resources for using green infrastructure for stormwater management. For today's agenda, we will begin by talking a little bit about Water Now and our TiR initiative. We will then talk about some of the toolkit resources, including green infrastructure, before handing it over to our guest speakers and finishing with a Q&A. Today, our guest speakers are Craig Holland, the Senior Director for Urban Water for the Global Cities Program of the Nature Conservancy, here to talk about green infrastructure financing and his on-the-ground work in communities. And we will also hear from Amanda Hollauer, Watershed Manager for the City of Atlanta's Department of Watershed Management. Amanda will speak on the innovations found within the City of Atlanta and how her city has addressed stormwater challenges through green infrastructure and their innovative financing through an environmental impact bond. In-house with me today is Caroline Cook, Water Now's Water Policy Director and the creator of our outstanding toolkit, as well as Jesse Bersinger, our Database Manager and Master of Tech, who will be on hand to answer your questions and man the chat related to the webcast. On that topic, we want to provide a quick rundown of the Zoom webcast and some of the audience features at your disposal. Below you, you'll see some icons that you can click on to interact with the webcast in case you have any questions that you'd like to see answered at the end of the presentation, if you'd like to speak to other audience members, or if you're having any issues related to technical problems. On your left is a general chat icon where you can type a message to the room, and I would advise using this function if you're facing technical problems, such as the inability to hear us. Keep in mind that your messages can be seen by other attendees. Jesse will be able to reply privately to you directly. You'll also be able to submit questions through the webcast using the Q&A tools seen in the Q&A. By clicking on this icon, you can submit a question in the pop-up box to any member of our speaking panel. Again, Jesse can answer you directly, so if you'd like to submit a question for the end of our webcast, just say so and include which panel member you'd like to hear an answer from. These options will be available for the entire webcast. In addition to these functions, Water Now will also be asking some polling questions throughout the presentation to interact with all of you. In a second, you'll see a pop-up screen go up on your computer. So let's test out this technology. The question is your community using green stormwater infrastructure solutions to address stormwater challenges? You can answer, yes, we've invested extensively in green stormwater infrastructure. We have a few programs. No, we haven't invested in these programs, or I don't know. So just click your answer on the screen and we'll give you all a few minutes to vote. Okay, now let's see what the results are. All right, it seems like actually quite a few of you have a few programs that have already been implemented. That doesn't mean that there aren't any resources that you won't learn today. And for those of you that haven't invested in these programs, you'll certainly learn a lot. So just to let you know, we will have 2 more of these polls throughout the webcast, and we really do appreciate your participation in them. For viewers that aren't familiar with our organization, Water Now Alliance is a network of local water resource decision makers supporting sustainable, affordable, and climate resilient water strategies across the entire One Water spectrum. Water leaders include mayors, city council members, county supervisors, GMs, public works directors, and water agency directors. These are the local leaders responsible for making decisions about stormwater management, wastewater management, and water supply at the local and regional level. So why local leaders? Well, we focus on these decision makers because they represent 95% of all spending on infrastructure at the local level across the nation. It's this spending and these local decisions that have the greatest impact on the nation's water future. When Water Now uses the term sustainable, what we mean is providing safe, healthy, and affordable water services for people while preserving the integrity of water resources and the environment for future generations. Within our operations, Water Now focuses on 6 water strategies. Together, they represent a critical path forward for water leaders. These 6 solutions include reuse and recycling, water conservation and use efficiency, source water and watershed protection, water trading, transfers, and other market mechanisms, groundwater management, and green infrastructure, which we will talk a little bit more about today. As part of our work mission, Water Now launched Tap into Resilience, an initiative created to support cities, towns, and water agencies in accelerating and scaling up their investments in on-site, localized, and distributed solutions. This supplements and integrates with existing built water infrastructure. So distributed infrastructure may seem like a pretty fancy term, so let's unpack that. On-site distributed water infrastructure are decentralized, localized, and on-site systems and technologies that are distributed over many properties, both public and private, do not have to be owned and operated by a city, utility, or water agency, serve the same functions as conventional infrastructure, and can operate in concert with existing infrastructure. Specific examples of distributed infrastructure include common green stormwater infrastructure such as bioswales, permeable pavement, green roofs, green streets, and rainwater capture. Other pieces of distributed infrastructure include turf replacement, leak detection devices, and high efficiency appliances and fixtures. In fact, there are many solutions that fall under the category of distributed infrastructure. Your cities and towns may already be realizing these projects by using a variety of rebates and other incentive programs to encourage homeowners and businesses to be investing in these localized and on-site strategies. We see these distributed solutions as low-hanging fruit, capable of addressing water management issues that leaders face in their communities. But one of the questions that we get a lot as an organization when we're talking about distributed solutions is, are these strategies actually infrastructure? And our answer is yes, absolutely. Decentralized on-site systems can serve the same functions as traditional water infrastructure because they can manage stormwater runoff, support a reliable water supply, and provide much needed water treatment. These solutions represent long-term investments in our water systems' functionality and resilience. By supporting traditional infrastructure options with distributed infrastructure, water leaders provide useful benefits to communities and ratepayers. The big picture benefits of localized infrastructure generally are they're less expensive and less time intensive to implement than building centralized water infrastructure. They can restore and enhance watershed and ecosystem functions to support water supply resilience and health, and they provide multiple benefits for communities and ratepayers. Tap into Resilience is at its heart focused on accelerating investment in 21st century infrastructure. Water leaders are no longer limited to a single option of expensive conventional infrastructure to address water resource challenges. Utilities can invest in local strategies that benefit their community for the best possible results. The biggest issue as we see it moving forward is that agencies and cities are implementing localized and on-site projects, but on a small basis. Distributed infrastructure has not been developed at a scale where stormwater, significant water supply, and water quality advancements are being seen. In some cases, water leaders require support in answering financing and project implementation related questions. So with that in mind, I'll be handing this presentation over to Caroline, WaterNow's Water Policy Director, who will walk us through the TiR toolkit and how you can use this to support your community's water infrastructure. Then we will hear personal accounts from Craig Holland at the Nature Conservancy and Amanda Hollauer from the city of Atlanta, Georgia. Caroline, take it away.
Thanks so much for that introduction to Tap into Resilience, Tim. So as Tim mentioned, I'll be discussing a critical part of the campaign, the Tap into Resilience Toolkit, which is a portal to everything water managers need to scale decentralized water infrastructure all in one place. So that you can see how the toolkit works, we'll have a live walkthrough in a little bit, but first I'm going to go over the information included into the toolkit to put it all into context before we dive in. So the toolkit includes 6 main categories of information, which are the online modules we'll see in a few minutes, this success stories, downloads, explanatory videos, our resource library, and what we call the Ask an Expert feature. So I'll briefly cover each of these categories, but first let's do a quick survey of the group with another one of our polls. So for this question, we're asking, how familiar are you with the Tap into Resilience Toolkit? And so don't worry, all of the polling is anonymous, so you can be honest and say you haven't seen it yet. And so we'll just give it a few minutes for people to submit their answers. Okay, so let's check out the results. And it looks like most folks are not yet familiar with the toolkit, which is great, which is why we're having these webcasts. So with that, let's jump in to what the toolkit has to offer. So the bulk of the toolkit is the interactive and customizable online modules that cover over 60 topic and issue areas, including finance, tax, accounting, and legal how-tos, using mandates and incentives to motivate ratepayers to deploy localized solutions, and steps to securing the long-term benefits of distributed strategies. Generally, the toolkit is set up as 2 main modules, each with multiple subparts. So the main modules are what are my financing options, that covers utility costs and revenue sources, debt financing localized infrastructure, and accessing state, federal, and philanthropic funding. The second module is the localized water infrastructure implementation strategies, which covers ways to employ decentralized solutions on both public property not owned by the utility and private property. The toolkit also includes the success stories of communities already using localized infrastructure as real-world case studies on how water managers can scale investments in these sustainable solutions to meet their drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater management challenges, and avoid reinventing the wheel in their service areas. In a few minutes, as Tim mentioned, you'll hear from Amanda with the Atlanta Department of Watershed Management, which is one of our success stories. To provide truly practical resources, the Toolkit also gives access to examples of on-site reuse, stormwater ordinances, memoranda of understanding, a bond council opinion, and conservation easements, each with contextualizing summaries that can be easily downloaded. Next, to help water leaders understand complex topics around building more effective distributed infrastructure programs, the toolkit presents short videos on topics including how to debt finance decentralized solutions, what environmental impact bonds are and where they've been issued before, stormwater credit trading programs, and why it's important to engage with utility customers on social media channels. The toolkit also includes an all resources library that provides both a quick reference guide to the toolkit materials as well as additional resources on localized infrastructure. And last but not least, as a distinctive part of the toolkit, we've put together a team of experts to answer water leaders' questions on tax, accounting, financing, municipal bond, and other water infrastructure topics. Through the TiR Toolkit Ask an Expert portal, a short, easy to use online forum, decision makers can connect with these experts who stand ready to answer community specific questions about localized water infrastructure investments free of charge. In just a bit, as Tim mentioned again, you'll hear from Craig Holland with the Nature Conservancy, who is one of our valued expert panelists. So, how does the toolkit actually work? WaterNow's online interface makes accessing the toolkit, each of these elements, as easy as clicking through the interactive modules, using one of the quick reference guides, or searching the All Resources library. So to give you a better sense of what this means in practice, I'll now switch over to the live website view, and we will walk through the toolkit together. Pardon the technical difficulty here. Okay, so you can access the toolkit in multiple ways, and if you're already on the Tap into Resilience website, as I am here, you can go up to the top navigation menu from Start Implementing and choose Tap into Resilience Toolkit, which takes you to the introduction to the toolkit. And since we've already covered what the materials are, I'm going to go ahead and click on the link, which takes me to the toolkit landing page. So if you wanted to come here directly, you could do so by typing in the easy to remember URL of tapin.waternow.org/toolkit. So from the landing page, I'm ready to get started. So I will click that. And then I'm taken to the toolkit welcome page. As I'm reading the welcome page, I see that this is where I can access the toolkit modules, the quick reference library, and the Ask an Expert portal. Because the toolkit modules include a lot of information for our purposes today, we'll walk through how to access two of the sections, environmental impact bonds and using mandates to motivate private property owners to employ green infrastructure. So to access the environmental impact bond materials, I'll scroll back up a bit and click on the What are my financing options sections. This takes me to a page with an overview of this main toolkit section, which again covers utility costs and revenue sources, debt financing, localized infrastructure, and accessing state, federal, and philanthropic funding. Because I'm interested in learning about environmental impact bonds, I click on the debt financing localized infrastructure link, since I know that EIBs are a type of debt financing. This takes me to this overview page where I see that there are several subsections about different types of debt financing and how to navigate tax, accounting, and legal issues when using debt. There's also access to the Ask an Expert feature, where I could submit a specific question about EIBs through this online form and be in touch with one of the TiR expert panelists. But before I submit an expert request, I do want to see what the toolkit has to offer. So scroll down a bit and click types of bonds, since again, I'm looking for info on EIBs. I see that there are 3 options, one of which is EIBs, so I'm going to click that one. And then I'm taken to the relevant page where I now have access to an overview of what an EIB is, and what the pay for success concept means, access to an explanatory video on how EIBs work and information on where they've been used before, and a link to Atlanta Department of Watershed Management's case study, which you'll hear more about in a minute. So now that I've read this overview, I'd like to know a little bit more about this topic. So I'm going to click the video link, which takes me to a new page. So I'll note here that all of the links in the toolkit are specifically designed to take you to a new page so that you don't lose your place in the main toolkit module, which is still available here if you click back. So turning back to the video, I'm going to scroll down and I see that I can hit play, and I now have access to a short video with Eric Letzinger, the CEO,
I'm Eric Letzinger. I'm the CEO of Quantified Ventures.
So now that I have a better understanding of EIBs and types of programs that this mechanism can fund, I'm now curious on how I can use local ordinances to motivate private property owners in my community on how to install green infrastructure in their homes and at their homes and businesses. So to get to that section, I'll close the financing layers and scroll down to the implementation strategy section. I see now that this section includes an option for private property localized infrastructure strategies. And because, again, I'm interested in getting green infrastructure built on private property, I'm going to click that link. As with the debt financing section, this page opens with a summary and additional sublayers. And after reading the summary and based on the headings, I'm going to click motivating private property owners to employ localized solutions. This brings up two options. And since I'm interested in stormwater ordinances, I'm going to click mandates. This gives me access to an overview of the various types of mandates, examples from cities across the country that have established ordinances that set green infrastructure requirements for private property, and a link to EPA's post-construction stormwater regulations. So I've heard a lot about stormwater credit tradings, but I'm not so sure what they actually are. So I see that there's a link for those, which I'll click. And another short video pops up with an overview of Grand Rapids' program, which was implemented with the assistance of American Rivers to help meet Grand Rapids' and MS4 permit requirements, distribute green infrastructure equitably throughout the city, and mobilize the private sector. You'll hear more about other credit trading programs and market-based systems from Craig in just a few minutes. So that is a very brief overview of just two sections of the Toolkit online modules. You can access the other 50 or so sections using the same approach. And I'll note here that we do view the Toolkit as a living resource that will change and grow over time based on additional materials we identify, new case studies, and feedback from the Toolkit users. To provide feedback on your experience, go back to the top navigation menu. And again, under Start Implementing, you can choose Share Feedback. This section, there are two online forums, one that allows you to share your community's story with Water Now, and another that allows you to provide your feedback on your experience with the Toolkit, which is here. I do encourage everyone to participate in these opportunities and be part of Tap Into Resilience. Okay, so before we move on, I would like to cover one last aspect of the Toolkit over the live screen. As you can see, the Toolkit online modules include internal links and resources, such as the EIB video link that we clicked. But the website also has a separate library where each of these resources lives. So for us today, I want to highlight how a Toolkit user can access all the resources cited in the Toolkit modules through the library without clicking through the layers that we've just done. So first I'll go to the All Resources link at the top of the navigation bar, which takes me to the All Resources landing page. And if I scroll down, I'll find a filter navigation bar that lists all topics, all regions, and all types. Since I'm interested in just the TiR Toolkit materials under all types, I'm going to choose TiR Toolkit. This brings up all of the internal resources in one place. So you can also filter the TiR Toolkit resources by region and topic. And since today we're interested in green infrastructure under topic, I will choose that. Again, this brings up all of the TiR Toolkit materials specific to green infrastructure. Some of the resources are reports, some are videos, and some are example ordinances. While these are also embedded within the toolkit modules, you can find them quickly here by using the filter feature. Okay, so that covers how the toolkit works for today. And before I turn it over to Craig, I will take us back from the live screen to and do one last poll here. So after seeing the toolkit demo, I have a better understanding of how to use the toolkit as a resource for my utility. True, somewhat true, neutral, somewhat false, or false. We'll give everybody a few moments to submit their answers. Okay, so let's take a look at the results. All right, well, it looks like that was a helpful overview. So I really appreciate that feedback, everyone. And with that, I will turn it over to Craig to talk about his work at TNC.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many folks interested in this topic and on the call today. And thank you so much, Caroline and Tim and the whole Water Now team for hosting this important webinar and putting together what I think is a really incredibly comprehensive toolkit of a lot of the things that, myself, my team, and many others in the space have been thinking about for a long time, but never had a central repository to go to get this type of information. So just a brief introduction on myself and on the Nature Conservancy for those who are not familiar with the organization. TNC is the largest environmental NGO in the world. We have about 4,000 employees with chapters in all 50 states and 72 countries around the world. And I work for the Global Cities Program, which supports the work of our city-based programs, which are operating in 40+ cities around the world and nearly 30 here in the United States. And my team specifically supports our internal cities programs and their stakeholders, which are often city agencies and utilities like yourselves on this call, who are working on the ground to develop policies, programs, and projects that drive water quality and flood resilience outcomes. And our work is primarily focused on developing the conditions for new environmental markets and incentive-based programs. We also structure financing and implementation tools to support those markets once they've been implemented. And the Water Now team, they asked me to present on a topic that I might be able to provide some technical assistance on through the Toolkit's Ask an Expert feature that you just heard about. So today I'm going to do a brief primer on the Washington, D.C. SRC trading market, policy drivers, outcomes, investor and market actor perspectives, and some lessons learned to date. It's also worth mentioning, again, for those that are interested in credit trading, that there are many other cities around the world that are looking at the DC model to potentially replicate. And in some cases, my team at TNC is helping them directly. And in fact, I think I saw on the attendee list that Bob Newport's on the webinar. I want to call out Bob because he has been a great partner to us during our time, during his time with the Metropolitan Planning Council in Cook County, where there is an interest in building a similar market. So hi, Bob. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. So first, let's just talk about the underlying policy and regulatory framework that enables this, this market to exist. Caroline touched on this briefly when she showed stormwater ordinances, and this is the example of the stormwater ordinance in Washington, D.C., which puts a requirement on new development to manage up to a 90th percentile storm event, which is 1.2 inches of capacity. And the threshold for who falls under this ordinance is any new development over 5,000 square feet or any major renovation whose project cost exceeds 50% of the pre-project assessment and are also greater than 5,000 square feet. So it's a very stringent stormwater rule, and it's a retention-based standard, meaning that any water that is captured on site needs to be infiltrated, evaporated, or reused in some way. And so this presented a challenge to a lot of developers in the district. And what DC wanted to do was to provide them with some flexibility vis-a-vis a credit market, which we'll get into. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So this market really achieved several goals for the district. Obviously, it shifts the cost of new impervious surface management to private developers so that over time, all land in the district is managing stormwater. It provides flexibility to developers to most cost-effectively utilize and maximize space. It creates a market for delivering stormwater management projects that can benefit private developers and regulated entities. We can also buy credits as a means of compliance, so agencies. And it incentivizes development of projects in areas of the district where you typically don't see private investment. And that's what you're looking at right here on this slide and the subsequent slides. So what you see here in these circles are the areas in the district where most of the development has traditionally occurred and is occurring in DC. And you'll notice that most of the development is really concentrated in the central business district of DC, primarily in Northwest and Southwest. If we can go to the next slide, please. And if you overlay the, go back, please. Thank you. And if you overlay the sewer sheds over this map, what you can see is that most of the development activity that's happening is in the combined sewer system. And if you've been following what's been happening in DC, there's been a tremendous investment by DC Water to completely manage the combined sewer overflows through a huge tunnel project that's happening right now. It's under construction in DC. But the MS4 parts of the district are actually seeing a lot greater water quality challenges, and that's primarily where DOEE, who is the Department of Energy and the Environment, who is the administrator of this market, is focusing their efforts vis-a-vis their MS4 permit. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And what you're looking at here is a map of per capita income based on the 2010 census. And the deep blue regions are areas of deep poverty within the city. And if anyone's been to DC, they know that the city it's split up into quadrants, and the southeast and northeast parts of the district traditionally have had a lot of challenges with poverty and also with lack of green space. So one of the areas that is really interesting about this market, if we can go to the next slide, please, is that if you, again, overlay those sewer sheds onto this map, you can see that by shifting some of the development activity that's happening in the combined sewer system and the money that's going in to comply with the ordinance over to the MS4 in Southeast and Northeast DC, you're going to be achieving many social outcomes in addition to environmental outcomes of additional green space in places where it's needed most. Next slide, please. And again, these circles just kind of further illustrate where those areas are where you'd likely want to see supply, so that's in the MS4, and where demand would be coming from in this market, and that's in the combined sewer system. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of what's been happening historically in the market to date. And the market is really, it's been experiencing exponential growth in the volume of trades. That's the left axis there. And prices per credit are generally coming down. And what we see this as a sign of a maturing market. So like with any environmental market, the market administrator, in this case, again, DOEE, needs to constantly evaluate whether the market is achieving its goals. And one area of concern is a plummeting credit sale price. In DC, this is really due to large pools of credits that were grandfathered under the old regulations. And DOE is currently considering some changes that will help support development of new credits in the MS4, while also slowly sunsetting grandfathered credits. And I'll touch on some more lessons learned a little bit later. I think the basic takeaway from this slide is that we see a growing market, and that's exciting for all participants. Next slide, please. So for any credit market to function, you really need high quality credit suppliers. And you also typically have a chicken or egg phenomenon, which is what's going to come first, supply or demand. On the demand side, they want to make sure that there are credits available at a price that has value to them. And on the supply side, they want to know that there's someone that's going to buy credits if they go and invest in that money, in those projects. So this is really where credit aggregators come in. They're able to interact with both sides of the market. Private landowners that are willing to host sites and need technical expertise and sometimes financing to develop projects, and private developers who want credits at scale to meet their price and volume expectations. And I should say in full disclosure that TNC is currently operating in this market as one of its largest credit aggregators, and an operation called District Stormwater that I help run. And we really did this to support the development of a market that we felt exemplifies a lot of the values and principles that we advocate for in cities around the world. So again, one of the areas that my team really focuses on, we call it market stimulation, where we see markets that really we want to see thrive. We may make direct investments in those markets to be able to share that information and those lessons learned with cities around the world. Next slide, please. And this is just an illustration of really what the credit aggregators do and how the various relationships interact. So what you see in the top circle are the investors. They may make a loan into an aggregator. That aggregator works with a private property owner to develop a project. It also works with the regulator to permit that project and certify it. And then it sells those credits to the regulated development, which in return, when they get those credits, they're able to receive their certificate of occupancy and ensure to the regulator that they are conforming to the stormwater ordinance using off-site credits. And this is all part of the same permitting process. So the permitting process that an aggregator goes through to develop a project is the same permitting process that a regulated development would go through to meet its ordinance requirements. And I'm happy to answer any questions sort of on the technicalities of the market, either on this call or if you want to reach out to me through the expert, Ask an Expert feature. Next slide, please. So if credits are unavailable for purchase in this market, let's say, supply ran out, regulated developers always have the option to purchase credits directly from an in lieu fee program run by DOE. And the in lieu fee, it currently sits at about $3.61 per credit. Credits are denominated in 1 gallon retained per year, whereas the average selling price of the credit is around $2, which is more than a 70% reduction in price to the developer. And this is also, I think, significant to DOE itself, who is actively becoming a purchaser of credits in this market to meet their own obligations. So for those folks on the phone that have looked at public-private partnerships or have looked at pay for success or pay for performance models, this is another example of that type of structure in the sense that you have credit suppliers out there generating projects that they may ultimately sell directly to the agency responsible for permit compliance. And the credit market itself is driving down costs across the district on those types of projects. So again, not only do private developers who have an ordinance requirement, can they buy in this market, but we're increasingly seeing public agencies purchase as well. Next slide, please. So what do investors need? This is something that Caroline asked me to go through briefly because I assume this is something that is often on the minds of various folks on this call. Well, they need regulatory certainty. They need to make sure that the market is there for the period of time that they're investing, which is typically, anywhere from 10 to 20 years. They need to have an easy to understand analog. So in this case, the easy to understand analog might be a carbon market or a solar credit market or something like that, so that they can figure out what type of capital they want to provide. They need to know supply and demand. They need to have some supply and demand certainty So they want to know that, the developer can develop projects and that there's going to be enough supply on the market, that demand is going to use the market, and that, that there is some sense of where demand is coming from out into the future, which you can look at in any credit trading market as sort of the amount of development activity that's happening in any given city and the types of incentives for entering the market that the administrator provides. They want project cost certainty, so they want to know what the project is going to cost, which means as an aggregator, you have to shift a lot of risk onto your general contractor, which is, something that requires very good project planning. And then, they also want to make sure that they're going to get their capital back. And that really comes down to the management structure of the aggregator. So in this case, we got investors comfortable with our work because they knew that we would pour every resource that we had into making sure these projects were successful because our reputation was on the line. Next slide, please. And from a market supplier standpoint, from the aggregator standpoint, they need projects, they need pre-development financing. In fact, DOE is now providing grants directly to aggregators for doing outreach to landowners, advocates in the building community. So developers, want to be able to talk to someone that they trust, and city regulator isn't often on that list. But there are ways in which DOE is doing a really good job of reaching the folks that can ultimately reach those developers, and some demand certainty. And demand certainty in this case would come in the form of some sort of purchase guarantee or price floor that is supported by the market administrator. Next slide, please. And finally, and this is my last slide, and we'll just look a little bit about the lessons learned that we've had to date. And this is not a comprehensive list, but some of the ones that came top of mind to me, which is first and foremost, DOE now has a purchase guarantee program where they are guaranteeing purchases of credits, regardless, if you can't find a private buyer to buy them. And it would have been great if that was launched at the onset of the market. It actually took them almost 4 years from the time the market was launched for that program to be stood up. Secondly, there are tax issues that, as you folks might be looking at credit trading, are likely going to come up, and it's good to be proactive about addressing them. One such example would be whether or not generating credits on a property tax exempt site might cause that property to lose its tax exempt status, which is something that we had to work through in DC. Trying to limit or eliminate grandfathering of credits. Again, this can create distortions in the market on the price of credits. Finding the right emissaries to make sure that the right people are finding each other on both the supply and demand side. Streamlined permit guidelines, and again, grants or some way of recovering pre-development funds that will allow, that will encourage, I should say, credit suppliers to go out into the market and start drumming up business. And I believe that was my last slide. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions or catch up with folks offline after the webinar is completed. Thank you so much for listening.
Craig, thank you very much for that presentation. As a East DC resident at one point, it's really fascinating to see what you guys have been working on, so thank you. We will now be hearing from Amanda Hollauer, the watershed manager at the City of Atlanta. Amanda, please take it away.
All right, hello, thank you. Sorry for that delay. Yep, as Tim said, I'm with the Department of Watershed Management, the City of Atlanta. And I'm going to talk briefly about our green infrastructure program here, a few aspects of how we're implementing and funding it that are kind of relevant to the Tap Into Resilience Toolkit. Next slide. All right, so for some background on our department, I feel like I'm getting some feedback. Are y'all hearing that?
No. You're fine on our end.
Okay, all right, making sure. All right, so the Department of Watershed Management, we're a regional water and wastewater utility. serving 1.2 million customers. Our core services are delivering safe drinking water, collecting and treating wastewater, which is all funded by our ratepayers. We also have as a core service managing stormwater in our watershed protection office. However, despite a estimated $40 to $60 million annual need for stormwater and watershed improvement projects and operations maintenance, we do not have a dedicated source of funding to meet these needs via a stormwater utility fee. So next slide. But stormwater, nonetheless, is quite a challenge to the city's resilience. The combined impacts of urbanization and climate change. Impervious surfaces create high volumes and velocity of stormwater runoff, which are degrading our waterways. It affects public health, causes flooding, construction, and property damage. And due to climate change, Atlanta is currently experiencing more frequent and severe storms, which is just compounding issues. We've had at least 2 100-year storm events since 2009, causing widespread damage. And we've found that the 10-year storm is happening every 2 to 3 years. Last year, 2018, was the second wettest year on record for North Georgia. And we do receive stormwater complaints citywide. So, next slide. So our Resilience Atlanta plan, our resilience strategy, the city has identified the significant need to fund and implement comprehensive stormwater management for the city, for the city's resilience, particularly in the face of climate change. And we are committed as a city and a department to the use of green infrastructure as a key and often more cost-effective strategy for tackling this need. And with the multiple additional benefits that can provide to communities and residents, to refer to as the triple bottom line benefits: environmental, social, and economic. Outcomes that are created by many of these projects, enhancing communities, spurring economic development, wildlife habitat, improving air quality, urban heat. So, under the leadership of the Department of Watershed Management, the Atlanta City Council adopted in 2017 a green infrastructure strategic action plan that promotes the use of green infrastructure across departments, as well as with outside partners, set the goal of a 225 million gallons runoff reduction annually through the use of green infrastructure. But a lack of adequate funding for stormwater management overall really necessitates the use of creative sources of funding, partnerships, many alternative approaches to meet that goal. All right, next slide. And so we're implementing our green infrastructure vision through several different programs and initiatives and quite a variety of tools in our funding toolbox. And I'm not going to talk about all of them, but just touch on a few. I see here within our combined sewer area, we have 4 remaining combined basins after partial separation. There we have access to our water sewer ratepayer funds to provide capacity relief to the combined system. So we're looking for innovative ways to integrate gray and green elements, and we have been constructing large and signature green infrastructure projects to provide that capacity relief and the co-benefits. Some examples you see here, the first project we did was the award-winning historic Fourth Wood Park Pond, which serves both as a visual centerpiece to this park and functions as a stormwater detention basin to alleviate some severe flooding in the Clare Creek combined sewer area, which saved the city $15 million over the alternative, which is an underground tunnel. And it's contributed to over $500 million in economic development in the surrounding area. We also, in Southeast Atlanta, between 2013 and 16, retrofitted 4 miles of roadway with permeable pavers and installed a variety of other bioretention practices bioswales, stormwater planters, as part of a large green infrastructure initiative to address major, sort of in response to major flooding, historic flooding back in 2012, I believe. And then right now we have a couple of projects in our North Avenue combined sewer area, Boone Boulevard, Green Street, and Running Cook Senior Park that are under construction and will be coming online in the next year or so. All right, next slide. So another funding source we have tapped into, we've been able to take advantage of a sales tax, municipal option sales tax. It was first put in place and approved in 2004 for the department. Since 2016, we have been able to use 10% of the revenue from this tax for stormwater. Typically, it's a 1-cent sales tax. It spreads the cost of upgrading and maintaining our water, stormwater infrastructure to a lot of visitors and workers and people who use the city's infrastructure but don't pay our water bills. It does require reauthorization by voters every 4 years, although it's been overwhelmingly approved. And it's 10% of revenue that council allocated to stormwater specifically in 2016 provides us about $12 to $13 million annually. And so we've been able to begin to address a backlog of drainage issues throughout the city, as well as responding to citizen complaints, and focus on fixing and replacing our aging infrastructure, rehabilitating, cleaning, maintaining, as well as evaluating all of these sites and projects for the use and integration of green infrastructure throughout the city. All right, next slide. And so then a couple of other tools I'll spend a little more time on, because Caroline and both of these as approaches that you can find resources for in the toolkit. And that's our regulatory approach for our ordinance, and then our creative financing mechanism that we've used with the TiR. Next slide. All right. So in 2013, we amended our stormwater ordinance to add an additional green infrastructure requirement for all new and redevelopment projects. That's both residential, infill, and commercial, new and redevelopment. And the requirement is to manage the first inch of runoff on site. This is mandatory. There are no direct financial incentives associated with it. And there were a number of factors that led to the successful development and adoption of this ordinance, including a technical advisory committee that's in place, robust stakeholder involvement, including the development community from the beginning, a willingness to compromise on certain elements, and a lot of outreach, education, and assistance documents. It was unanimously approved in 2013. Next slide. And as I mentioned, to help residents and businesses meet the ordinance requirements, we developed guidance and implementation materials, including these manuals specifically for single-family residents and small commercial operations, providing a list of acceptable practices, so reducing the need for lots of complicated calculations, easily accessible, tear off details and specs, and then simplifying the review and approval process. Next slide. As a result, under this ordinance from to date, 2013, we've actually permitted over 5,200 projects, as you can see, on private property, removing over 1 billion gallons of runoff per year. And this graph just shows that we've been actually approaching that green infrastructure, citywide infrastructure goal that I mentioned. Annually, we've been coming close to that on private property alone since the ordinance has been in effect. So that's been a success. Next slide. However, the problem is that, as you can see from this map, which shows shows the location of all of the permitted green infrastructure sites. Development is not equitably distributed through the city. The locations of these projects clearly are tied to these economic development patterns, which have been concentrated in the northern and eastern parts of the city. So that necessitates, that creates the need for the city to find creative and alternative ways, leverage partnerships, et cetera, in order to address the underserved and more vulnerable areas of the city, those that do have the greatest need, and fill in that gap. And this is particularly because equity has become a high priority at both the city and our department, as evidenced by the Department of Water Management's participation on Water Equity Task Group, which is an initiative by the U.S. Water Alliance. There's actually 6 cities participating, and this just shows the logos of all of the organizations in Atlanta that's on Atlanta's task force, all the member organizations, along with us, the member facility, a number of community stakeholders, and we're all working to determine how our water infrastructure projects and investments can enhance improved equity for the residents of the city, have equitable outcomes. Okay, next slide. So that's where our environmental impact bond came in. It actually provided us a mechanism for financing green infrastructure in one of these areas, in a particular watershed, creek watershed. That was an area of high need. And the opportunity actually came about through the Rockefeller Foundation. And the Rockefeller Foundation's innovative financing program is looking to pilot one of these, and provided a grant to support the first publicly issued municipal EIB. That grant funding provided the services of advisory firms, quantified ventures, and Neighborly, who helped our team structure, market, and issue the bonds. And so the projects are, we're getting $13.5 million through this bond to finance 6 infrastructure projects in the Parker Creek watershed, as I mentioned. And this watershed is the only one completely encompassed within the city. The headwaters are underground, but in the downtown area, heavily impervious, and then these neighborhoods are directly downstream from that. So they've been disproportionately impacted by stormwater runoff, with sewer close flooding and stream degradation, and those types of impacts. And these are historic neighborhoods all along Proctor Creek to the Chattahoochee, but they have been, experiencing high unemployment levels and poverty, and also by brownfields, lack of green space. So there's a significant investment needed here to restore the watershed. These projects are specifically designed to capture and reduce stormwater runoff, while also providing multiple community benefits, improving public health, resilience, and quality of life. One of these particular benefits is local workforce development and jobs. We're working with the Water Equity Task Force partners on creating local jobs and employment opportunities for residents, the construction and maintenance of the project in their new. We'll be measuring the performance of these projects using an established outcome metric, which is the volume of stormwater captured across the project, which is expected to exceed 4 million or a 56 million gallon annual reduction. Okay, next slide. So a little bit more about EIBs. What is an EIB? It's an innovative financing tool that uses a pay-for-success approach to align public spending with the outcomes issuers care about from projects rather than the project alone. So it's a form of debt similar to a traditional bond, except that part of the payment is determined by how successfully the projects achieve a predefined environmental or social outcome. and an independent third-party evaluator measures and validates that outcome, whether or not the outcome is met, or whether or not it meets a predefined performance threshold that determines how much the investors are paid. And then a central element of the model is assigning an economic value to the project benefits, many project benefits, multiple, and pricing these benefits into the performance-based financial structure. You can kind of see that diagram there. All right, next slide. So our EIB, as I mentioned, is going to finance 6 green infrastructure projects in the upper portion of this watershed. And the projects are sort of a mix of different types. We have some ecosystem restoration, stream and floodplain restoration projects, as well as BMPs, urban BMPs with green infrastructure, bioretention features along streets and in city parks, and also constructed wetlands. And the primary goals of all of these projects are to address local flooding and water quality issues by reducing stormwater runoff, and both combined in separate areas. In addition to providing, as I said, the additional benefits with creating new green space, restored habitat, public environmental education, and improved public health, air quality, and local workforce development. And many of these additional benefits were monetized as, along with primary benefits, flood reduction, water quality, to capture the total value of these projects to both the department and the city as part of this structure of this plan. Next slide. So some of the advantages to using an EIB from our perspective in general, it allowed us to tap into a new source of private funding. These impact investors that are becoming more common and who are interested in seeing and in getting return, but seeing positive benefits from that return as well. And this pay for success model, it aligns incentives for both the issuer and the investor, so it's kind of a win-win situation. Additionally, the investors take on some risk because these are risky projects, and they're a lot of times uncertain outcomes. So investors are willing to take on a portion of risk, but are then rewarded with a share of the financial benefits if the projects do better than expected. And as I mentioned, the model takes into account the economic value of the co-benefits. So it's looking at the outcomes and not just, getting the project built. And then, and so that in that way, it's a particularly well-suited mechanism for high-impact projects, such as green infrastructure, that have all these different outcomes and really benefit the community. But ones that don't necessarily have access to funding, at least for us, gave us the opportunity to prioritize these types of impactful projects. And then to evaluate and demonstrate their performance, which helps us both helps inform our future planning and make the case for future dedicated funding for these types of projects. And so the way that our deal was structured, in order to reflect this shared risk and reward approach, was with this two-tier financing structure in which there's a base case and a high-performance case. And the base case, which is, all the expected outcomes through a range, there's a below-market interest rate. So we're actually paying less than we would with a traditional municipal bond, the standard rate. But then at a high performance threshold, and basically if our project can aggregate capture more than 6.52 million gallons, that's our high performance threshold, then there will be a performance payment rendered by the city to the investors of $1 million. And that has about, we did a probability analysis part of it, has about a little over 1 in 4 chance of happening. And basically this optimizes the outcomes for both the issuer and the investor as far as the expected value of the investment. All right, next slide. Okay. And this is my final slide, just to kind of summarize the EIB. It took us about a year to structure the deal, including building a financial model, doing project design and probability of achieving the volumes, and then setting all those terms. So the bonds closed, EIB closed on January 31st of this year. It's sold out. And we have this financing in place, and we're working on implementation. We have a 5-year construction period to get all the projects built and then evaluated. So the independent evaluation will take place in year 6, and the report will be issued determining whether or not we pay the performance payment. We will still be repaying the bond as usual over a 10-year period. And that's the last slide I have. I'm happy to answer any other questions from the EIB. But
Okay. Amanda, thank you very much. And thank you to Craig as well. Amanda, we'll keep you on the phone because we'll have a short Q&A in a second. But we're very fortunate to have you both as guest speakers today. And we also want to thank you, our audience, for joining us today. Water Now Alliance will be hosting our next webcast focused on other features within the TiR toolkit in November. So keep your eyes out for those invites. If you want to learn more about tap-in resilience and access the toolkit, feel free to visit our website and tap in at tapin.waternow.org. If you have a localized infrastructure story of what you've been working on in your own community, please share your story with us on the website as well. Some other things to talk about real quick. For those of you who want to learn even more about our work, we're excited to share with you that we'll be hosting WaterNow's 5th annual Tap into Resilience Summit this April 15th and 16th in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at the Water Center at UPenn. Registration is live on our website, so visit waternowsummit.org to sign up to attend. And we'd like you to invite you to learn more about our work, our solutions, and become a WaterNow member. Be sure to check out waternow.org. It's free, easy to join, and you'll have access to more of our resources and events through your membership. All right, so we'll be moving into Q&A. And before we begin, you'll find that Jesse will include a survey link in everybody's chat box. After the webcast, we would appreciate it if you take a few minutes to provide your comments and opinions on the webcast, as well as offer suggestions for information you'd like to see covered in our upcoming TiR webcast. So with that being said, let's move on to a quick Q&A. I know we're a little bit over time. I'd like to open the discussion by asking a question that we received from our audience to Caroline, which was about the Ask the Expert feature. Is this available to anyone or just WaterNow members? And who are the types of people that provide these answers?
That is a great question. Thank you for that. The Ask an Expert feature is open to anyone that is interacting with the toolkit, and not just WaterNow members. So it's designed to answer community-specific questions that our local elected officials might have, but as well as executive management and staff within a utility who are curious on how they might answer, for example, their CFO's question about whether they can debt finance localized infrastructure. So if a question like that were to come in, they would likely be connected with our expert panelist, Ed Harrington, who is a former GM at San Francisco Public Utilities Commission and a very skilled accountant, and he can walk you through the process to answering that question, which ultimately is, yes, you can debt finance localized infrastructure. Other panelists include Craig, who you heard from earlier, as well as Eric Letzinger, who worked with Amanda on their EIB, and several other tax attorneys, including Roger Bainman, who is located in New York and works with Natural Resources Defense Council, and many others that are listed on the Tap into Resilience website. And if you just click on that expert panel link, it'll take you to the full list.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. We had a question for Amanda from the audience, from Bob Newport. He said, Amanda, can you talk a little bit more about how you're pursuing workforce development as part of the Proctor Creek projects? And are they requiring contractors to do some local hiring?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. We're actually working on that right now. We are working on incorporating, and so it'll be, you know, both construction and maintenance of the projects down the road. But the idea is finding a way to employ people in the local neighborhoods where these projects are going in. So they're, you know, getting jobs as well as the other benefits of the projects themselves. And so we are looking at supplementing what was, we have a first source ordinance that encourages local hiring, but that being citywide residents on construction projects of a certain amount. But for the EIB, we are working with our local workforce development organizations as an initiative of the Water Equity Task Force to figure out how to incorporate requirements into our RFPs for the construction of each of these 6 projects, to hire within certain priority zip codes, to create jobs, apprenticeships, as well as training. And we're looking to score those elements as part of the proposals. And so we still have to, we're still working with our procurement office, et cetera, to figure out exactly that vehicle, but that is the approach.
Okay, thank you so much, Amanda. Really appreciate that. Again, we want to thank everyone for attending this webcast. That concludes Tap into Resilience. We hope you've learned a lot, and we hope you all have a lovely day. So thank you. For more information, contact us at info@waternow.org. You all have a lovely day. Thank you.